Hello everyone and welcome to my channel. This video is the first ever recap video on my channel, and today what I'm going to cover is in fact a competition between 4 players, a double round robin, played 3 times over. And the special thing about that is these 4 players are Magnus Carlsen, Fabiano Caruana, Hikaru Nakamura, and Gukesh D. If you follow the chess world consistently, you would probably know that literally these are the world champion, the reigning world champion, and the top 3 rated players in the world. So in fact this this tournament is one of a kind, and it is called the Champions Showdown. And evidently the games featured in this video is going to be pretty fascinating. So today I've got 3 games for you guys in the recently ended tournament. And the first game consists of Magnus Carlsen versus Hikaru Nakamura, the classic showdown of the 2 best players on the planet, and let's follow who gets the upper hand in this game. It is in fact a really interesting and strategic battle. The second game is going... As for the second game, it is going to be a game between the world champion against world number 2. Actually, it's going to be a game between the world champion and world number 3. Also, a brilliant tactical game. And the final game I'm going to show you is a game between Fabiano Caruana and Magnus Carlsen, arguably the best endgame player of all time. And indeed, this game involves an endgame masterclass, and let's see how these players played the game out. Now let's dive in immediately. First, we begin with our first game, Magnus versus Hikaru. It wouldn't be a good recap video without these 2 players playing. Now the game began with the king's pawn, and indeed it turned into the Sicilian defense pretty quickly. Now the game turned for a hyper-accelerated dragon, a really interesting position, and very dynamic and very challenging for both sides to play. Now here in this line, the move here is e5, and already it is entering special territory because of how the imbalances exist on the board. So first of all, the pawn placed in the center is going to be the critical piece of the position. It is going to control more squares, but it is also going to be a potential target for the black position. Now, of course, here white defends the pawn. Everything is theory, and here queen c7 theory, f4, knight h6, and here Magnus decided to take a turn for more interesting positions. Here he went for e6, and evidently the idea behind which is just weakening these squares in front of the black king. Here Hikaru went for f6, e takes d7, bishop takes d7, and you see there are some holes around the black camp, but it is not fatal yet. Let's see how Magnus tries to exploit these weaknesses. Now here queen f3 is played, immediately putting pressure on the c6 pawn, supporting this pawn as well, and bringing out the queen. Now of course here white can go for long castle or short castle if he moves the bishop out of the way. Now rook b8 is played, bishop c5, avoiding the hidden threat on the bishop, and here bishop e6, bishop d3, covering the d-file for potential long castling possibilities, short castles and short castles. Magnus ultimately decided not to go for long castles because evidently it is going to be pretty dangerous because of this. And of course, evidently, here immediately there's the bishop g4, so it will be a bad move. And of course, here the engine actually suggests h3, the idea of which is to defend the g4 square, and if rook f e8 right now, then actually long castling would be a good idea, and this would go into an extremely dynamic position. But Magnus decided to go for the more concrete short castle. Rook f e8, queen e3, bishop s7, bishop a7, going for sneaking in a pawn, and here knight g4 is played. Queen c5 apparently is a mistake. And here, Hikaru found the only move, a very, very deep tactical idea, which is f5. So some of you might say, why not bishop b6? Why not bishop b6? And in fact, this is exactly the move played in the game. Let me show you the continuation. So after the queen moves out of the way, we take the rook, and now the threat here is that bishop d4 evidently. So knight e2 would be the only move defending against this threat. Now, rook d5 is played, queen a3, bishop b2. You see the queen literally has no other place to go to. Queen a3, bishop b2, and rook a b1 again saves this exchange, but that does not change anything because of rook b5. And after rook b5, the queen is being targeted, so we can't play bishop b5. Here, queen a4 is played. Now, bishop d4, queen takes rook b1, and the sequence ended. So in fact, this is the insane thing about f5. Hikaru literally went on a sequence that is 8 moves long, and it consists of intricate calculations, and this is really fascinating to me. And in case you don't, and if you look at the clock, it simply took him a matter of more than 1 minute to calculate that out, and that is really, really insane. So after the sequence, we are left with this position to work with. Here, Magnus played the best move, knight c3, and here the only move would be to play rook f1, because this gives black the temple, and of course to continue work like queen b2 for instance. But unfortunately, that is not played. Hikaru went for rook b4, which is a mistake because of the move queen c5. Now, the idea of queen c5 here is that this rook is feeding a bit crap. For instance, if knight f6 is played, now we can attack the rook, rook b2, and then this queen is basically stranded for life, protecting this rook, and this rook doesn't really have a good way out. And in case he tries to move the rook out in another fashion, for instance, queen b8 as played in the game, that just simply leaves e7 hanging, so h3 first kicking out the knight, and then we take the e7 pawn. Now this is literally the only mistake Hikaru made in this game. After knight h4, queen e5, queen takes e5, queen takes e5, f takes e5, knight f4, and in fact this position is still around the balanced. a4, takes, rook b3, rook c1, rook a3. Basically, right now, this is a knight-pawn versus bishop endgame, and as we all know, Magnus Carlsen is a beast in endgames. But, of course, Hikaru, as a 27-37 rated player, rapid, is not going to be taken down easily. So let's see how the endgame grab will continue. So first, Magnus brought his king, centralized his pieces, managed to take down this weak c5 pawn, and started pushing his pawn, pushing further. But now, a critical move in the position h4, undermining the pawn structure after takes. The position is basically hopeless for black, because after this king up, there's no way to stop the advance of this pawn, and of course, meantime, the rook is stranded defending the advance of this pawn. So the game ended right here, and the really fascinating thing about this game is this brilliant tactical find f5, and of course also how literally between these players one pawn is going to decide the game. Well, Hikaru really initiated a truly fascinating sequence, but unfortunately he missed missed a move at the end of the sequence and lost the game. Now, let's move on to our second game between world champion and world number 3. So this game is a queen's pawn, and in a few moves we entered the king's Indian. Here, this white is taking on the fianchetto approach against the king's Indian. Now, in this game, at first, white basically tried to get this move e2, e4 onto the board. And sure enough, in a few moves, this purpose is achieved after bishop g4, f3, bishop back, and now bishop e3. White has successfully built up his position, and the idea here is probably to put some pressure on the queen side. But it is not always easy, because of knight a6, planning to hop the knight into c5, knight d3 stopping that plan, and now b6, further attempting to hop the knight in. Makes a lot of sense. Now, b3 is played, knight c5, queen e2, bishop c8 with the idea of rerouting the bishop over onto this diagonal to put pressure. Of course, a great idea. Knight b5 here is played, and the idea is to do this, to block up the threat of this diagonal brutally with a knight. Knight e8 here is played, defending d6, and perhaps planning to play knight c7 in the future. And of course, this is also a classic idea in the king's Indian, in order to give way for the f-pawn to make for the f5 pawn push. Now, here, bishop d2 is played, queen b6, rook f c1, knight c7, and now the only move here is played by Gukesh D, bishop f1, defending the knight further, and after h5, h4, f5, liquidation has begun on the king side. Now, of course, liquidating a position is one of the most critical and difficult tasks in a middle game, and let's take a look at how Gukesh successfully managed to come back from this slightly worse position to put up some counterplay on the king side. After e takes f5, g takes f5, you see the g file is actually open right now, and luckily the g5 square is now released for the white bishop. Now, black immediately made a mistake, rook a e8. However, on the other hand, the move suggested by the engine would be rook f7. This will be slightly better than the move given in the game. The reason of which is the rook actually belongs more here. This is the true spot that black can actually make a breakthrough through. So rook a8 is a slight inaccuracy, and after the move rook a2, avoiding the dark squared bishop, of course, f4 is played, again another mistake. The reason here is that white can voluntarily open the e-file and bring the queen up here, targeting this pawn further, and you see all of a sudden the move rook a2 starts to make sense, because the rook now can slide all the way over to target the king. Now, so king h8 here is played, avoiding the g-file, rook g2, rook f5 is again a mistake, allowing bishop d3, and here Fabi simply played rook d5, because he blundered an idea in this position, which is truly fascinating. So here, white began with king h1, and after bishop b7, rook cg1, knight b5 as preparation, and Now, we do not take back this knight. Rather, we sacrifice the bishop, opening the g file thoroughly, preparing to bring the queen over, sacrificing both light pieces, not taking any care for them, simply to go for the kill on the king side. Bishop f6, queen f4, and now all defensive measures are in vain. Here, black went for a last resource, bishop g5, but it is already in vain, even though this attempts to sacrifice the piece back. After rook g5, queen f6, I'll remove rook g7, and we can take with checkmate. If not rook g5, for instance, queen d8 played in the game, we simply go for rook g8, sacrificing a rook and preparing for queen h6, but this is a relatively simple mate in 2 for the world champion. Now, this game is really quite an insane tactical game, but more importantly, it is actually a game demonstrating how a dynamic position can actually hold potentials for both sides. You see, black had made beautiful progress on the king side, but ultimately still lost the game because of incorrect timing, perhaps correct timing as well, but inaccurate play further to exploit the king side. And Gukesh fought back ferociously and successfully grappled for the control of the g-file, brought his pieces in, and successfully went for the checkmate with this beautiful idea of bishop f6. So, this is the second game of today's recap, and now let's move on to game 3. Game 3 is an endgame battle, as I've mentioned, but it is literally, in my opinion, the best game of the entire tournament, the entire showdown. And here, according to the engine, the accuracy played by white is 95%. And let us quickly dive in to see how Fabi managed to bring out a perfect game in this round. So the game started out with the Roy Lopez, and this is called the Berlin defense, and quickly the game turned into what is commonly known as the Berlin endgame, a very famous position in chess. Now, all of these top grandmasters have studied this position in depth for quite a long time, and let us quickly look at how they demonstrated a perfect strategy in their endgames. So first, the pieces are developed, and they're centralized, and the first step into enemy territory is taken. Knight g5, attempting to trade out this bishop, and Magnus defended perfectly, rook h6. After rook fe1, further centralizing his pieces. Here h4 is played to stop perhaps the move h4 from white in order to solidify this knight. And here knight e6 is played, rook e6, knight e4 centralizing the second knight, and perhaps the knight is going to hop into the exact same square yet again. c5 here is played to add some control into the central squares, and of course to also stop the knight from entering c5. c3 is played, stopping the move knight d4. c4 is now played, and here g4 is the move. The idea is to chase out this knight and limit the position further for black. H takes g3, f takes g3, and now b5 from black, protecting this pawn, but the black position is already starting to suffer. King f2, b4, rook e2, and rook b8 trying to create further counterplay on the queen side, but this is already too late. So h4 here is the move, and I'll show you the idea behind this move in a few moves. Rook a6, h5, king f8, g4, knight h6, king f3, all the pieces on the king side is marching forward. Rook a2 here is played, Fabiano just says, who cares about the a2 b2 pawns? I'm just going to charge down on the king side, because here g5 is played, knight f5, king g4, use the king as a piece, and g6 is basically the only move because of the knight, because the knight is literally just trapped there. g6, h takes g6, f takes g6, and now e6. So this pawn is pretty near queening, and the knight perhaps can hop into f6 in the future. The rook is going to dive in on the d file, and of course also the rook is going to dive in on the h file. Now bishop d6 is played, and this basically sentenced the Magnus's death. Knight f6, b takes c3, rook h1 is still not caring for the pawns at all. Bishop f4, rook h7, not caring for the bishop at all. Threatening checkmate on f7, perhaps Magnus missed this move. Knight g7 blocking the checkmate, rook h8 check, king e7, rook b8, and an exchange is successfully won. Rook b2, attempting to enter a hopeful position because of how these pawns are actually pretty near queening. So knight d5 here is the move, king d6, knight f4, we take back the bishop. c3, scary, but in vain. Knight e2 is the move. If c2 here is attempted, rook b2 simply stops all threats, and if not, I mean, there is no way to defend this pawn. Thereby, white successfully wins the game. Now, we have successfully covered all three games that I hope to show you, and let's sum things up. So, in this tournament, what I enjoy the most is the quality of the games and the creativity in these games as well. These players did not go for the top lines in their theory for every single game. They played interesting chess, they challenged each other, and that is really what I love to see in the game of chess. I hope you enjoy as well. And if you would like some more recap videos in the future, please tell me down in the comment section. The World Cup is ongoing, and I would love to cover some games from the World Cup as well. Tune into my channel, and my Endgame strategy series will be launching soon. Don't miss out. Subscribe if you haven't. Let us enjoy chess together. Peace until then.